Me is basically Moses, a series of farewell speeches by Moses before he dies. He dies at the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, but nothing really, not much happens in Deuteronomy. It's more of a review, and I would say it's like a living will from Moses to the people, everything he wants them to remember, his legacy or whatever. So this book, Bamidbar, which literally in Hebrew means in the desert, is the last book of action in the Torah. And historically, does anybody know? I'm sure somebody does. The what separates Deuteronomy from the other four books? Does anybody know? Anybody know historically? Okay.
There's a difference in the commandments.
There's a difference in the commandments. Yes. Natalie, you're muted. You're muted. It's okay.
I think they found it at a later time and put it into the Torah. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Do you know when? How much later?
Uh, that I don't know, but I think that's why there's a lot of difference in that part of the Torah too, because they found it later.
Right. And Brad, where's Brad? I don't see Brad. Oh, well, anyway. Oh, Brad. Yeah. So also, Brad, I know, you like the literistic, the hypothesis theory about writing the Torah of the different writers. And the first four books were already completed or written. And then in around 630, when during the time of King Josiah, um, there were a lot of terrible kings in this time. Terrible kings after King Solomon, which, he died in like 900 something BCE. There were a lot of terrible kings, and they kept going into idolatry and out of idolatry. And then in like uh, I guess 830 or the 820s is when there was an Assyrian invasion into northern Israel, and 10 of the tribes, well, they'd already split. I mean, this is interesting, so I just want to give you some context. After King Solomon died, first, during King Solomon, it was a huge empire. It was one country. But after he died, his son, Rehoboam, came to the throne. And actually, King Solomon was pretty oppressive. In order to build the temple, he conscripted into slave labor a different tribe every month to build the temple. You had to go into Jerusalem to build the temple. You had no choice. So he was harsh in a lot of ways, even though he was considered a great wise king by the rabbis. Anyway, when Rehoboam became king, like a lot of the leaders said, if you will be more lenient and compassionate that your father, we will follow you. And he actually said, and this is in the text in the book of Kings, no, I'm going to be harsher, stronger. And I always imagine that, he must have had like hundreds of siblings, hundreds of princes from all of the wives. And, they were this elite group, and they just felt that they had the right, like an oligarchy, to rule the way they wanted. And so 10 of the tribes split off, and suddenly there were two kingdoms in the land. There was the kingdom of Judah, which comprised of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. And we are all from that kingdom, and that's why we're called Jews, because of the kingdom of Judah, Yehudim, Jews, from Yehudah, the kingdom of Yehudah, Judah. And the other one was called the kingdom of Israel. And those were actually the more powerful, richer kingdom. It was bigger. It was the northern part, and there were 10 tribes in there. And when the Assyrians, which was a huge empire, invaded in about 830 BCE, something 820, something like that, they carried them off in captivity. They conquered them and carried them off. And that is the source of the expression, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That's where they were taken off, and they were disappeared. And, they see some Jews in India, some Jews in Ethiopia. Well, they don't really know, but they disappeared. Some of them fled to Judah. The Israel people from Israel fled to Judah. Similar, same religion, same culture, just two different countries, kingdoms, I would say. And they also brought their own version of the Torah, which was slightly different. That's why there are, like, they say two creation stories, and there's two stories of Moses. I mean, Noah's Ark. If you look, there's two different stories in there. That when they basically put the Torah together, there were some stories that were so popular that they didn't pick one or the other. They included both. There's doubles in certain parts. Anyway, in 632, the Josiah, who had become king when he was like 8 years old, so he was now in his 20s or something, and he had been raised by the prophets and the priests. So he was more pious than some of the previous kings. He wanted to do a renovation of the temple. And we find this in the book of Kings, this incident where they come to him and they say, "We found a fifth book written by Moses. We found a fifth book of the Torah, which is the book of Deuteronomy, or a version of the book of Deuteronomy, because there's a lot of redactors and editors over the years. And there is a theory that the prophet Jeremiah wrote it, that prophets of the time wrote it, and it was written to kind of remind the Judeans, no, yeah, the Judeans, that they were really straying terribly from following Judaism. And if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, there's this one section called the curses and blessings. This is the famous place where it says choose life. It's in the, and also the Shema and the V'ahavta are in this book. But King Josiah basically read the book and was terrified because it said that if you don't follow the Torah, these terrible things will happen to you. We have that in other places in the Torah as well. And so he said, go find a prophet and ask the prophet if this is true, if what's written in this book is true. And this is all in the book of Kings, which is later. And they go to a woman prophet named Huldah. Most of people have never heard of her. She was a woman prophet. She was a cousin of Jeremiah. And she said, yes, this is true, but it won't happen during your lifetime because you are a pious man, to King Josiah, which was 630 or 620 BCE. And he lived and died. And then what happened in 586, which was like 50 years later? The invasion of the Babylonians and the destruction of the first temple. So she was saying she prophesied that or whatever because the Israelites were still not, following, and there was a cause and effect mentality. Anyway, we're looking at now so that's all after what happened after. We're looking at what was, everybody knew about much earlier. And so we're looking at Parshat Hukot, verse 20. And okay, I know you've been studying every week. What were the two or three, what's the two big things that have happened in the past? These two major events that have happened in the last several weeks in this book, would you say? Herman, are you speaking? Because you're no, you're not. What are the two big events? Well, last week, what was what? What was last week?
It was Korah.
Korah, a huge rebellion, right? A huge rebellion. And they were swallowed up and they thought they were, equal to Moses. And they said, why are you so great? Aren't we all priests? And their hubris and their rebellion ended up bringing their destruction. The other thing that happened was what? Like the major thing and the reason that the people had to be in the desert for 40 years.
The spies.
The spies. And what was the result of the spy incident? Come on, you guys know. What was the result of the spy incident?
When does Miriam get leprosy?
That's also in this story, yeah. She gets leprosy. But the spy incident, they all said they didn't want to go in. We're scared. The 10 of the spies said, we're like grasshoppers. They're like giants. Oh, David, you raised your hand.
Well, Joshua and Caleb gave a more accurate version, objective version of what the land was like when they were part of the spying missions, the surveillance missions. And Joshua was allowed to go into the land of Israel and lead the Hebrews. and Moses was denied the privilege.
Okay, so let's just take a side step for a second. They all saw the same thing, basically. So 10 of them seemed to see something else. So what does that tell you really about perception in the world or reality?
I don't believe they saw something else, Rabbi.
No, I said they all saw the same thing.
They lost their faith in God.
That yes, they lost their faith in God. So you're saying that they all saw giants and that they all saw people that were giants and intimidating, but Caleb and Joshua didn't think it was a problem. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And so what does it say about the spies who felt intimidated?
Well, like Herman said, that they didn't have faith in God because Joshua and Caleb did, and therefore they were not punished because they did have faith in God.
Faith in God, and also perhaps these were slaves. These are people with slave mentality who never imagined being able to overpower or be part of a conquering army. They brought their own insecurities to the same experience. I mean, you know that you bring yourself to every experience, and that's why we all experience something different because we are ourselves. 10 of them, and this told God what? That they're not ready. They're not ready. They're not able to conquer the land because if you don't think you can do it, if you're terrified before you even start, you're gonna fail. Yes, Mara or Harv, because you both have the same one. What's it talk?
This makes me recall something that actually Brad and I were having a discussion about concerning the fire last week
Yeah.
and how fire in the Torah can represent two very different and contradictory things. And so in the spies, we see everyone sees the same thing, but there's a contradiction in the perception. And then, and I've been thinking about this because I was looking at this Torah portion, which has the red heifer in it.
Right.
And again, there's this contradiction in terms of how we interpret what we see. And I'm not sure that it's faith in God. I think it's a need to understand the complexity of the possibilities of what we see. And
So, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's all I
So
have.
this is perfect segue because what we're going to read a portion. It's going to be now what you all see that we're going to discuss because there's a huge discussions and arguments and trying to understand this particular thing about Moses and the rock. So I want to read it first, and then we're going to talk about what you see or what you think. What was the sin? What was the sin? Because and the reason I wanted to talk about the 40 years is that these are not the slaves anymore. These are different people. They've been in the desert 40 years. It's a whole new generation. It's, the millennium, the millennials now. If we are the baby boomers, it's the millennials now who are mainly in the population, and the Gen Z and the Gen X, it's another generation. So I just want to keep that in mind, and let's just read this section and then talk about it. And also, I want to talk about Miriam for a minute too. So who would like to start on chapter 20, verse 1? Who would like to? Who would?
Somebody else? Well, I will.
Okay, go ahead.
The Israelites arrived at a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kaddish. Miriam died there and was buried there.
That's all it says about Miriam. Miriam died there and was buried there. By the way, in a body, there's a commentary. It says they arrived in a body, and some say this means it was the new, the new group, the new generations, as I said. These are not the old ones. These were the new ones. That's one of the commentaries. So Miriam died there and was buried there. And just read one more sentence.
The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron.
Okay, so what's the midrash about that? That Miriam died and there was no water. Somebody must know this midrash. Come on, you know the midrash about Miriam and the well. Miriam and the well. What's the midrash about Miriam and the well? Okay.
That one, really.
Okay, so, okay. The rabbis say, because it says Miriam died and then there was no water, the midrash is that everywhere that Miriam was, water appeared. That a famous well or some kind of well would be discovered wherever they camped and Miriam was alive. And that is the reason that Miriam is very much associated with water, because we know she was associated with, Moses and the Nile and following him. And this, that Miriam's well, and that is the reason that we now have Miriam's cup at the Seder and we put water in it. We have Elijah's cup. The tradition is you have Elijah's cup with the wine, and now you have a beautiful Miriam's cup with water. And the idea was that wherever she went was without water. There was water, and that she died. Another possible interpretation is what does the text say about how the people felt about her death? What does the text say?
Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing. And they didn't grieve her. It seems like they didn't grieve her. We're going to see a little bit later, if we have time, when Aaron died, they grieved for 30 days. And that's where we get the idea of Shloshim. In the first 30 days is considered grief from that thing. Nothing. And so there's another explanation that because they didn't grieve, the water dried up. Not that just because her death created the drought, but the fact that they didn't even grieve is a reason. Yes, David, you have your hand up.
Could this be another midrash that there was an example of sibling rivalry? Moses struck the rock without God's instruction. He struck it twice, and because he wanted to produce water, knowing that Miriam was associated with water all the time and wherever she went, that there were plentiful water.
That's a really interesting idea. Rebecca?
I just want to point out what Jonah said last week was that without Miriam, there wouldn't have been a Moses. And so she was extremely important. And there's, I guess, in some circles, there's the belief that Miriam may actually be the Messiah.
Well, there certainly is an idea that she wrote the entire song of this, the Song of the Sea. I don't know about the Messiah. I never heard that, but I'm good with that one. Wait, who else raised their hand? Just
Yeah.
David,
So following up on Rebecca's point, which is a good one, but in your point as well, that there was no mention in the Torah about anyone mourning. Why didn't they mourn? Why wasn't there anything mentioning? Forget the fact that she was a woman and things like that. The Torah has many things where showing there's strong women, and when the laws of secession provided that I forget whose daughters were able to inherit, etc. But any event, she was important, and
very important. And a prophetess, Miriam.
And a prophetess, sure. So why wasn't there any mention? What do the rabbis say about that? And I know we're looking at it through 21st century eyes, but it just seems incredible that there is no mention of her. No mention of
grief.
Her death. Yeah.
Okay. Mara?
Just because there's no mention of the grief doesn't mean the people weren't grieving.
Well, we know, I'm going to point out there were two people who were grieving big time, I think, which were their siblings. And we're going to look at that in a minute. But there is a commentary that says when Aaron died, there was no one like Aaron. He was a peacemaker. He was a very gentle, a unique guy with a lot of weaknesses. We know that he was the one who agreed to make the golden calf. So they grieved because there was no one like Aaron, but this commentary says Miriam was such an amazing teacher, such an amazing leader of the women and role model that even though Miriam died, there were many other Miriams to step in and follow her or take her place, that there were other Miriams, other women. That is one per, I don't know, lame or weak or interesting. I see you, Natalie, shaking your head. So what are you thinking? What do you think? Unmute so I can hear your thoughts.
That doesn't make sense to me. Perhaps, I don't know really, but perhaps the point of this story of going into the land was what was important. And they're just sort of telling you that she died. And that's it, because I think it didn't connect with what was going to happen in the future as a story. This is all stories going on. That's the best I can see from this morning.
I just had a thought, which is interesting. You know, okay, this is like an example. A friend of mine, a close friend of mine that I've known for a very long time in her 70s, just got diagnosed with ALS, which is terrible. And she's been going to different doctors, and her doctor that she's been meeting with, who's an expert, is in her 30s. And there are some experimental drugs. But this woman in her 30s said to my friend, well, do you think you really want to go through this at your age? In other words, you're old. Why, your life, you've lived your life. It's not such a big deal. It's almost like the younger generation doesn't understand that even if you're older, your life is still valuable. It's like, well, they lived a good life, she died. And so no grief necessary, as opposed to somebody else. So I wonder if there's this idea that, okay, she was an old lady, she died, you know, and it's part of life and not grieving her. But who truly grieved her, I think, were Moses and Aaron. I think it was a huge loss for them. And let's look at that. And
Okay.
anybody else want to say anything before we go on? Okay, who would like to read verse? We said the community was out water, and they started again complaining to Moses and Aaron. So we're at verse 3. Who would like to read? Rebecca.
And the people contended with Moses and said, would that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord? Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink.
This is so interesting. So what's there? Okay. So let's analyze this. These people were never in Egypt, right? They were
Oh,
not in Egypt.
no, Rabbi.
They were born in the desert.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
With all due respect, the way I understand this, this is the group of people who were in Egypt, because
They died out. They died
they're
out.
only a couple of years out of Egypt.
40. It's 40 years later.
Already it's 40?
Yeah, it's jumped. It's 40 years later. This is 40 years later.
I was under the impression it's only a couple of years.
No, 40 years. It's 40 years now. All the commentaries, all historians say this happened. This is 40 years. Because Moses and Aaron and Miriam didn't die a couple of years out of Egypt. They died right before entering the land, which was 40 years. They didn't make it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is 40 years later. So these people who are kvetching about Egypt never lived in Egypt. So what does that tell you about history and information and facts? What is it?
It's just like the old story of I had to walk so many miles to school in the snow.
Well, okay.
Those stories get passed down through families.
Okay. Any other thoughts about that? Merle?
Just because it's not what you expect at that moment, you're going to complain.
Okay.
I mean, I hear people doing that now.
It's interesting. Some people say, oh, it was so much better 50 years ago. And yeah, it was, or 60 years ago. Yeah, it was better if you weren't white. If you were white, it was better. If you weren't a woman, it was better. If you weren't a minority, it was better. And if you had health insurance, it was better. I mean, it wasn't better. And yet it's false news, it's fake news, it's propaganda, and it's myth. It's myth about the good old days. Where did they ever get the idea that they had grain and figs and vines and pomegranates in Egypt? When did they ever have that, or the Hebrews ever have that? And yet, when things are hard. So, what does this tell you about this generation? What do you think?
They're going to complain no matter what.
Okay. What, any other thought? Yeah. Anything else?
They have a fantasy of what was or what is going to be.
Okay. I think you're right. And we're not going to get to it, unfortunately, but today, but at this other part of the Parsha, they fight in two serious battles with two different kings as they try to cross into the land. They ask permission to cross Moab and Sihon, and they're refused, and they end up having to do battle. So far, they haven't really battled yet. They're not hardened yet. But right now, they're a little bit spoiled, I think, or their expectations are not, is certainly, we don't know their expectations of how things will be. On the other hand, not having water is a scary thing. And there is fear there because you can't live without water. Abby, you're muted. You're muted.
I don't have it open to where it is, but maybe they were looking at Moses as God rather than asking God and looking at Moses as a God.
Oh, to bring water to them?
Yeah, like now it's sort of like Jesus Christ. Like Moses is that person. You bring us water rather than asking God to bring water.
That's interesting. And maybe they saw Miriam as God too, if you're going to go that far, and that she's gone. And now what are we going to do? So who else raised their hand? It says Abby Barron and one other raised their hand. David.
Yeah. I don't think the younger generation was much different than the older one who left Egypt, because didn't the Jews who left Egypt complain that they didn't have meat to eat and it was better when they were fed as slaves in Egypt? So
Yes.
I think it's human nature, and I'm not sure, if any of us who have said, oh, remember when, to your spouse, significant other, remember when we lived in that studio apartment,
Right.
and, we didn't have to do this and pay maintenance and all of this stuff. And we were happy then. Maybe not that we were happier, but nostalgic.
Nostalgia, exactly. And we didn't have air conditioning, in that studio apartment. And yeah, you're right, exactly. Okay, so let's continue. If only why, and Moses, okay, verse 6. Who would like to read? Diane, you want to read? Okay, verse 6. But you have to unmute, Diane.
That matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of the Eternal appeared to them, and the Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts."
Keep going. Let's read this whole incident.
Okay. Moses took the rod from before the Eternal as he had been commanded. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of the rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank.
Okay, somebody else just read the end of this episode so we can analyze it. Who else would like to read from verse 12? Somebody else. Okay, Lynn. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron.
But the Eternal One said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah," meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Eternal, whose sanctity was affirmed through them.
Okay.
This has always bothered me, Rabbi.
Yeah, it bothers a lot of commentaries
yeah.
from Rashi down.
I'm a staunch defender of Moses. I really am. If you go back to verse, my eyes are getting to verse 8, it says, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water." It doesn't say talk to the rock.
Okay, in Hebrew it says, yes, in Hebrew it says talk to the rock.
Ah.
It says vidibartum. It says dibartem. Lidaber means to speak. It's speak to the rock in Hebrew. Speak to the rock.
The rock by hitting it.
Vidibartem el hasela. Talk to the rock. Okay, so what did Moses do wrong? There are so many. What was his sin? Or did he? Or if you don't think he sinned, and why do you think he hit the rock? Why do you think he hit the rock when God said, "Speak to the rock"?
Once before he hit the rock at God's instructions.
Okay, so he thought it was similar. He thought the speaking. Also, there's a commentary that says, when you speak to a slave, you often do it with a rod, and this is how he hit the rock before, and it's kind of a slave mess. You speak to them, but this is the way they understand. So that could be a possibility. Rebecca?
He refers to the congregation, the assembly, as rebels.
Okay,
Rebels.
so he insulted the people.
Yeah.
That's you think that's what he did. Okay, what else? What other thing could he have
Taken an
done?
awful lot from these people for many years.
He what?
He's been taken a lot from these people.
So he lost it.
But he's angry at the people.
He's human.
He's human. That's right. He's very human. Okay, Abby.
Well, I think from the very beginning, I think he was angry at the people. He was always calling them, I forget what the name was. He was always angry at the people. And that always bothered me because why can't he just say it like everything nicely? Like, why does he have to be angry? And he was angry at the people I think from the very beginning. So this is no different. He continues to be angry. And that's the one thing I don't like about Moses.
He may be angry at the people, but he always goes to God and intercedes, though.
Yeah, so as I said, like he didn't say, like he's taking responsibility for the water rather than God.
Oh, wait, say that again?
He's taking responsibility. He's being the one that, like I said right before this, that he's, instead of saying, "Oh, the Lord has given me the water," I don't know what he said before, but he's just doing, they say, "Okay, Moses, you get the water." It's the same thing I sort of alluded to before, that he is like the God rather than God, rather than, rather than saying, "God told me to speak to the rock. Now I'm going to speak to the rock," or whatever. I don't know how.
Actually, you're very astute and you don't even realize it, because this was one of the possible sins.
Oh, really?
Big one. When he said, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?"
Yeah.
God, shall we? And so he was putting himself on the level of making this miracle
That's
happen.
what I'm saying. Like I think like probably the Christians think that this is like Jesus Christ or something doing it.
Right, but it's Moses saying it, shall we?
Right. That he's like,
He's not saying, shall God give you the water? He's saying, shall we, Aaron and I, give you?
oh yeah, exactly.
So that was considered one of the possible transgressions. Okay, what else could it be? Merle.
I don't think he ever wanted this job. So
Well,
with,
yeah, but it's been a while.
with no leadership capabilities, so to speak, he's just mad and he's taking this stick and he's hitting whatever is available, and it happens to be a rock.
Well, he was told to speak to this.
Well, he was told to, but
it was a particular rock.
right. It's another thing he was told to do and he did, but it was out of the anger of having to do this.
Oh, so you just think he's been unhappy for 40 years?
Yes.
Okay. That's a long time. Okay. Now,
a lot of people are angry for a long time.
Do you think there's
Rabbi,
yeah,
can I jump in for a second?
please do.
Yeah, I think this is saying something about the magical power of speech rather than action, because from the very first words of the Torah, the God created the world through the word, through speech. He spoke, and the world was created. So here we're denying the essence of God by not allowing speech to have its role as opposed to action.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And also, there was this commentary that in the new generation, this kind of stick behavior, this strong action is not going to work as much as speech, and that they understand speech more than this harsh striking of things or these definitive things, that they need something else, which was this was Rabbi Sachs talking about it. But I want to go back to something else. Oh, Mara. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that for me, this is also about conflict resolution.
Meaning?
That if Moses is facing people who see differently than he sees, that to strike something is not the way to solve differences. That that speaking about difference, as God has really asked Moses to do, to speak to the people, that's the way to solve our differences.
And not call them names.
Not call them names.
Okay, now I agree with you. Thank you. I love this idea of the importance of speech, the power of speech from the very beginning. However, oh, Abby, go ahead.
I don't know if I'm in the right place, but is this where sort of like we're looking at using prayer instead of sacrifices, starting to use our words to pray or even to allude to this, that will be the way to God? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it does evolve toward that, but it's still far away. But
I don't know how far.
I thought about that too, about prayer, about the power of language. But I want to go back to something. Is there anything psychologically that might explain Moses behaving this way?
I have a solution in my own head, of course.
Okay.
If we're 38 to 40 years out of Egypt, Moses has been listening to this 38 to 40 years, constantly.
Yes.
How much more can he take? So he lost his cool.
I agree with you. I think you're right. Okay.
Yeah, can I say something?
Natalie.
In losing,
behind all of this that no one has mentioned yet is here you have this group of people. They cannot touch God. They cannot feel God. They cannot see God. this God that they're trying to be taught exists is just a total fantasy. Even to this day, we have the same feelings. It's not like they used to look at an object or look at the sun and say, the sun, that's God. So they were really confused, rightly so. And the fact that poor Moses, whoever said this poor guy, uh, for 40 years they have been annoying him and bothered, and why would they have believed this human that's standing in front of them? So in the story, this is a story, we have to show that Moses did something that was so remarkable that they would have to believe that he was instructed from God. And that's why these miracles that we talk about are in the story. That is the way I see this whole thing. We can make a whole big thing about this, but why should they have believed him?
Okay, I just want to, and then I want to call on Mara. According
Okay.
to the text, there was a pillar of fire and a pillar of, dark pillar of a cloud leading them all the way across the desert. So according to the story, there was this idea of God's presence that they could see, and he certainly just swallowed up Korach and everybody, so they know there's some, consequences. So and yet, yes, we know that for 1,000 years, Israelites really kept straying toward idols because it was really hard to believe in this invisible God, that they found it much easier to have both, if not just idols, at least both, to feel comforted and connected. So you're right. Okay, Mara
It's me.
or Harv. Okay.
I think you got to go back and remember Moses had a speech impediment. He didn't like speaking.
Oh,
He stuttered. He didn't have, psychologically, he probably didn't have the confidence to talk to even a rock. And it must have been a lot easier for him to strike a rock than to talk to people.
I
That
think
would be my guess.
that's interesting, and that's why the book of Deuteronomy is so remarkable and attributed to another writer, because he's so articulate, so verbose, and so poetic. In the book of Deuteronomy, it's like a different person, the way he speaks. Brad.
Yeah, Rabbi, at the beginning of this discussion, you talked about the incident with the spies and raised an epistemological question. How do we know what we know? And the issue there was that we can't rely upon our senses, upon our sight. And I'm wondering if in this episode, we're also supposed to question the sense of our auditory sense, the difference between listening and hearing. Did
So
Moses really hear what God was saying? Was he really listening?
that's interesting. Also, I was asking, but no one said it, so I'll suggest it. His sister had just died. He was in terrible grief and very sensitive and very vulnerable. And then, it's like he didn't have any time to grieve. The minute she died, the water disappeared. And there again, as Herman said, continuously kvetching, yelling, complaining. How much can he take? And at this particular moment, with the grief and the loss of his beloved sister, who really was there his whole life, he didn't, know, with her. He had no, he lost it, as you say. Okay, if he lost it, or he said, she'll bring it out, like sort of denying God's reality, or that God, it's a miracle of God, or that he shouldn't hit. Did he deserve this consequence? Did he deserve this consequence? Marina.
My question goes back to verse 8, where the Lord is saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water." So why did the Lord tell him to take the rod? The rod worked miracles before. The rod turned into serpent with the Pharaoh. The rod produced water in another episode. And now the Lord is telling him, take the rod. So maybe Moses assumed the rod will play a role. How else was he supposed to shake it or just keep it, or what was he supposed to do with it?
Exactly. What was the point of the rod if you were going to talk to the rock? Why did you need the rod? So I think that's a very good point. What was the role of the rod if not to touch or hit the rock is not clear. And so it could have made Moses assume that you speak and hit. Even if you speak, you hit too, or whatever. And I just want to point out that I'm going to call David and Merle. The water did come out. Even though he did the wrong thing, the water came out. So that's curious as well. It's not like it didn't work, it did work. So it's confusing. Okay, so David and then Merle.
Moses listened to God's words for many, many years in everything that God said. And if he didn't understand something or wanted to quote unquote argue with God about sparing some people and not other people, but he knew what consequences were. He knew with Aaron's son when they lit alien fire, what happened to them by not obeying God and by doing something that was forbidden. So the question is that I just thought of, that you just brought of, then why did God allow the water to come from the rock when Moses disobeyed him? What lesson is that to the Jews? If the idea was, if you don't listen to me, God, then there's going to be drastic things that's going to happen to you. Korach, Nadib and Abihu, and whatever's others that I forgot. So now by not listening to God, the water would still came out. And then I don't think the Jewish people knew that he didn't listen, because did God announce this in front of everybody, or he just told it to Moses?
Right. Remember, they went away, they fell down on their face and they went away, and then God talked to them, and then they went back.
Okay, well, other dichotomies in the Torah, and it's, somebody said it's I think Natalie said it's narratives or stories or things like that, and it makes it very interesting in discussions. And again, when you point out this was done years and hundreds of years after the first four books, it's made it interesting for contemporary people to think about all
Well,
these
this one was part of the first four books, but the other part. Okay, Merle and then Herman.
So we don't know what the rod really was and what it was supposed to be. To me, I'm thinking right now, it could have been a walking stick, and in the orders he was given, or his anger, whatever we want to call it, was the rod just a convenient tool for him to hit the rock?
But the rod had done magical things in the past.
That's true. What is the power of the rod, I
and
guess?
why did he say take the rod if he wasn't going to use the rod? That is very confusing. Okay, Herman.
Right.
What is Moses actually going to be punished for?
Exactly. What do you think?
Is he going to be punished because he lost his cool? Is he going to be punished because he called the people rebels? Is he going to be punished because he struck the rock rather than talked to the rock? It's very ambiguous. Here I have to question God.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I
have that right. Not
you
me.
do.
We all have that right to question God.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, all those questions that you asked are each different. Rabbi Maimonides said one, Rashi said one, others said one, each one of those things. But Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who's more contemporary, suggested something else, and it's kind of what you intimated, Herman. He was fed up. He was, in a way, done. He was done. He couldn't do it anymore. He was 120. his sister died, and we're about, he's old, and perhaps there's a whole discussion. Is there a time when a leader has outlasted his term or his time, when he should be there? So, wait, who else? Who else has their hand up? Because it just says, hey, somebody, Brad.
Yeah, I think the text is pretty clear in verse 12 why he was punished, because you did not trust me enough. Instead of relying on his senses, as I said before, Moses should have relied on faith. It's a question of faith again.
Okay, but is it fair? I mean, don't you have money in the bank? As I always say, if you have done well for so long and then you mess up, don't you get some benefit of the doubt? Okay, I messed up, but I've done so many things properly. To not be allowed to go into the land is a pretty extreme consequence. So, do you think it's a fair one? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's just? How do you feel about the result after, from the, taking them all through everything? It's like you're not going in, and neither is Aaron.
Moses got the short end of the stick.
So you think it's unfair, right? You're saying it's unfair.
Yes, definitely.
Why
were the people allowed to go in?
What? Who? I didn't
Why
hear.
were the Israelites permitted to go in? Look what they have done over 40 years.
That's right. I mean, but do you think Moses is held to a higher standard? Do you think that he has to live to a higher standard? I mean, I think about Miriam getting the leprosy, and there's this suggestion that, when you're a leader, you're held to a higher standard. This is actually a whole book I studied in rabbinical school calling it the symbolic exemplar, that as a rabbi, you have to be held to a higher standard than normal people. And I mean, I feel that, I guess, responsibility and burden sometimes myself. I can't, and I became a rabbi later in life, and I feel now I can't do anything I might have done in the past. I have to live within a certain parameter now because I'm a rabbi. And do we think we need to hold Moses to a higher standard because of who he is? And Aaron as well. Any thoughts on that? Merle.
I think in general, having been so involved in leadership for 40 some odd years, that even anyone that's considered a leader in some way is always held to a higher standard. I mean, I went to services one night, and Arnie came and picked me up because he couldn't go and he wasn't wearing what someone thought was appropriate clothing to come to services, and I got the brunt of what he wore to pick me up that night.
And he's a rabbi.
Well, and I think anybody that's in a leadership position is held to too high a standard in some cases.
Or not high enough in others. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Brad?
It goes both ways.
Well, maybe you can look at it just the other way, that even if God's favorite has this punishment for a lack of faith, even with a history of with his whole history with God, that can happen to the rest of us. So if you look at this from a didactic point of view, it's telling us if it can happen to Moses, it can happen to you.
Yeah, it has happened to them in other ways. But yeah, there is this other suggestion that it's fair, that it's, no one is exempt from, the punishment or the consequence of your action. Rabbi Sachs thought that it was really just Moses he'd outlived, his leadership position, that they needed Joshua, they needed a younger person that to lead them into battle, to lead them forward. They needed somebody of the younger generation, and that he and Aaron had, fulfilled everything they were meant to fulfill. And, Kabbalistically and Hasidic, they went, to the next world as, saints, as, holy beings. It wasn't a punishment, but it was more like, it's time for you to join me almost. It's time for you to go to the next level. You're done here. And your behavior, your lack of patience, your anger, your frayed nerves, you've been wrung out to the end, and I don't want to put you through anymore. That was another possible thought. So it's many things, and then we didn't even get to Aaron dies. He goes on the mountain and he goes up with his son, gives his son his priestly robes, and the son and Moses come down, and Aaron is there, and everybody goes, "Where's Aaron? Where's Aaron? We don't believe it. How could Aaron be gone?" And then they go into grief for 30 days. So we could spend a whole session on how beloved Aaron was, how feared or distant people felt from Moses, and how beloved Aaron was um, always. So sometimes it's easier to be number two than number one. You're not always liked. Abby, and then we have to do the.
Well, I just wanted to say something to Meryl because she said, what is the rod and the staff? And it just made me think of what is it, the Psalm, the rod and the staff will comfort you. So
Oh, that's in the 23rd Psalm.
now the 23rd Psalm. So I
Right.
just wanted to, because Meryl had made that comment about the rod, and immediately that came. I'm sorry if I change the subject here a little bit. I wanted to answer Meryl about, and as a thought too, what is the staff? What is it?
Well, I'll tell you something. I've done that at many funerals, and my interpretation now is you're we are the rod and the staff to the mourner, that we have to be the person to hold them up and give them strength when they are falling apart from grief. So my rod and my staff, we're supposed to be the rod and the staff. That's my latest interpretation, which
Not God is not the rod and staff
through us.
through us. Okay, that's okay. It was sort of an interesting question that Meryl brought up.
Yeah.
I
And,
like
and
I like those all of that. I mean, it can be anything you want it to be.
Okay.
yeah, because it
Marina,
teaches a lot. Sorry.
Marina.
You caused me to think about ways when a leader is regarded as close to a deity. In Christian tradition, Moses would have been
For sure.
similar to a Jesus, right? So maybe putting him down and denying him the right to enter the land was a Jewish way of saying, we don't have a deity among us. There is only one God, and our leaders are just leaders. They have served their time, and now thank you, goodbye, and you're staying here, and we're going on.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And we know in the Haggadah, in the classical Haggadah, Moses is not mentioned once. He's not mentioned if you look at the real original Haggadah. And also, we don't know where he's buried for the same reason. No shrine. You couldn't go pray to him or create some kind of a Buddhist temple, around him. So it's a similar idea. He's a human. He's human.
And we don't know anything about his children.
We
So
don't.
we
And they
cannot.
didn't inherit. They didn't
Yeah.
inherit any mantle of leadership. Aaron's did, interestingly enough, as the Kohen, the priests, but Moses's children disappear. We don't know. They never inherited anything. So there's a meritology as opposed to just inheriting. Okay.
I'm sorry. Isn't the rock where Miriam was buried, isn't that referred to later on in the Bible, though?
No, you're talking about Rachel's tomb.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right. So, Abby, it's our tradition to read the names of those who passed away and then say Kaddish. So, those who passed away during this month: Francis Chapman, Marcia Ellen Edelman, Betty Fields, Cy Fields, Samantha Cutler Green, Janet Corsandi, Stephen Yanover. Those who have yortzites: Eugene Abrams, Beatrice K. Abramsky, Miriam Arno, Robin Rose Artiaga, Peter Bach, Alan Barbaco, Elihu Ben Gera, Anat Ben Ishai, Teresa Benzwi, Eileen Jane Burkus, Freema Berman, Albert Berg, David Cantor, Irving Cheslaw, Gladys Cohen, Dorothy Cohen, Louise Creamer, Jim Dalla, Sheldon Dorff, Richard Allen Ehrman, Carrie Enov, Lawrence Scott Epstein, Frida Fine, Jean Feinstein, George Eduardo Feld, Beth Lisa Feldman, Shirley Fenton, Ellen Flanagan, Malcolm Fleischer, Dorothy Jean Fox, Mae Fox, Matthew Gantz, Arthur Gardner, Marion Gardner, Raymond Kurt Gertz, Kimberly Glover, Joseph Goldberg, Barbara Goldberg, Edith Goldfein, Michael Goldstein, Miriam Goodman, Abraham Gottfried, Edward Gottlieb, Aziz Gazini, Elise Grinstein, Max Grossflam, Henrietta Haim, Milton Handelman, David Harrow, J. Daniel Hertz, Miriam Herzog, Charlotte Hirsch, Sylvia Jacobson, Henry Jasny, Shirley Kamens, Burton Kaplan, Mayor Catan, Thomas Klein, Gertrude Kummer, Alan Kurtzman, Leon Lapidus, Peter Leibowitz, Jeanette Levin, Louise Rose Levine, Sidney Lewine, Mildred Lewis, Milton Lewis, Abe London, Sonny Lowy, Louise Martin, Barbara Melnick, Joseph Marini, Sheila Grace White Miller, David Minlin, Jenny Minlin, Myrtle Mullins, Lil Newman, Lena Noodleman, Leonard Penn, Miriam Platt, Gladys Polish, Ray Pulaski, Isaac Mickey Pressman, Marie Redler, Gail Maurice Reingold, Israel Ritberg, Pauline Roberts, Suzanne Rocker, Lee Rocklin, Rose Romick, Ralph Rosenbluth, John Rosenfield, Martin Ross, Eric Rothenberg, Adam Schulman, Jacob Schwartz, Sherwood Schwartz, Eugene Shaken, Kent Sherman, Gertrude Sigaloff, Samuel Spalter, Charles Stein, Janet Steinsapper, Pamela Stone, Natalie Tannen, Stan Tenler, Louis Wallach, Edward Weiss, Joseph Wiener, Bernard Whitland, Lynn Wolfe, Theodora Zola. I'd like to add my friend Mark Bennett, who passed away this week. Does anyone else have anyone that they would like to add? Okay, and we're going to say Kaddish in their name. Just have to get my Siddur. Where's my Siddur? Oh, it's here. Okay. 1 second. If you have a Siddur, it's page 298. 294. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah v'yoma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chaye chon v'yomei chon v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'me'ol maya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudusha b'rich Ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nata damiram b'yoma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya achayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav huya aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Shabbat. Shabbat shalom, everyone. It was a pleasure to study with you this morning.
Thank you. Feel better. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.